I still remember the night my mother told me not to come home. It wasn't a fight full of shouting or broken things. It was worse than that. It was calm, quiet, and final. I had just told her that I didn't want to go to law school. I wanted to work with children, to help those who had nobody else. She looked at me like I had just confessed a crime. Her voice was cold when she said, "I didn't raise you to waste your life on other people's problems." I tried to explain that this was my passion, but she didn't want to hear it. My stepfather just stood in the corner, silent as always, his face full of quiet judgment. I packed a small bag that night. She didn't stop me. As I walked out, her last words echoed in my mind. "Don't come home until you learn what life really is." I left without looking back. The first few weeks were a blur. I slept on my friend's couch, worked in a small diner, and tried to keep my head above water. I missed her so much it hurt, but pride kept me from calling. I told myself I would make something of my life, not for her approval, but to prove that I could survive on my own. Years passed, and life became both harder and more beautiful. I worked at shelters, took night classes, and slowly built a life helping abandoned kids. Each child I met reminded me of the pain I once carried, that feeling of being unwanted. Then one cold evening, I met a boy named Liam sitting outside the shelter steps. He was only 15, holding a torn backpack and a photo of his sister. He didn't speak much at first, but his eyes told a story of loss. I found him a place to sleep and brought him dinner. A few days later, he came back, not for food, but for company. Slowly, he became a part of my world. Over time, I learned that his parents had died in an accident and his only relative had refused to take him in. I couldn't turn my back on him. Maybe because I knew what that felt like. I helped him enroll in school, taught him how to cook, and celebrated his small victories. I became something like his guardian, though he always called me by my name, not Mom. And that was fine with me. We became family in our own way. Years went by. Liam grew older, taller, stronger, and I built a youth foundation to help kids like him. It wasn't easy, but every challenge made me stronger. My name started appearing in small newspapers, and people began to notice the work I was doing. Then, one morning, I received a letter. It was from my mother. My heart stopped when I saw her handwriting. I hadn't heard from her in almost 7 years. The letter was short. "Your stepfather is sick. If you still care, come home." That was all it said. I stared at those words for a long time. After everything she had said, after years of silence, now she wanted me back because she needed something. Part of me wanted to throw the letter away, but another part whispered, "Go, not for her, for yourself." Liam found me sitting quietly with the letter and asked what it was. When I told him, he said gently, "Maybe you should go. You always tell us that forgiveness isn't weakness." I smiled faintly and nodded. Maybe he was right. So I packed a bag again, just like I had years ago. But this time, I wasn't running away. I was returning on my own terms. And this time, I wasn't going alone. Liam came with me. Not as a child needing help, but as family. The drive back home felt like traveling through time. The streets looked the same, but I didn't. My heart pounded as we reached the familiar house, the one I once called home. I could see the curtains drawn, the same white roses by the porch, everything neat and perfect, like nothing had ever happened. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door with Lim beside me. When I rang the bell, it wasn't my mother who answered, it was my stepfather. He looked frail, his skin pale, eyes tired. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then his expression softened, and he said quietly, "You came." I nodded, unsure what to say. He smiled weakly and let us in. The house smelled the same, like fresh coffee and my mother's favorite perfume. I heard her voice from the kitchen before I saw her. When she turned around, her face froze. Her eyes widened, and the bowl she was holding almost slipped from her hands. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Then she whispered, "You really came." I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "You asked me to." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. She looked at Liam and frowned slightly. "Who is he?" she asked. "This is Liam," I said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He's family." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she turned away, muttering, "You always did like strays." Her words stung, but I stayed calm. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. My stepfather broke the tension. "She's done good, you know," he said softly, looking at my mother. "I've been reading about her work." My mother's eyes flickered with something, pride, maybe, or guilt. Dinner that night was quiet. Liam tried to make small talk, and I admired his effort. My stepfather coughed between bites, and my mother kept glancing at me like she was studying a stranger. When I offered to help with dishes, she hesitated, then nodded. We stood side by side in silence, washing plates like nothing had changed. But everything had. Finally she spoke. "You seem happy," she said softly. "I am," I replied. "I've made a life I'm proud of." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "I wanted you to have a future I never had. I didn't realize I was pushing you away." I felt something in my chest shift. All the anger, the years of distance, started to melt away. "I understand," I said quietly, "but you didn't have to lose me to love me." Tears filled her eyes. She reached out, and for the first time in years, she pulled me into her arms. It wasn't the same warm embrace I remembered as a child, but it was real. Liam stood at the doorway, smiling. My stepfather's eyes softened as he watched us. We talked for hours after that. About my work, about the kids, about everything we had missed. My mother asked questions about Liam, and by the end of the night, she looked at him with something close to affection. Before we left, my mother said quietly, "I'm proud of you." It was the first time I had ever heard those words. I smiled and said, "Thank you." "But I'm proud of me too." As we drove away, Liam looked at me and said, "She needed to see who you became." I nodded, feeling peace for the first time in years. The past was no longer a wound, it was a story. And maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened, but choosing to move forward anyway.